Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Welcome to our panel on leveraging the private sector to make markets work for farmers who face increased climate risk. We organized this session because the question of how we can make markets work for farmers as they deal with climate change really lies at the heart of any kind of credible climate action in the agricultural sector. And I'm here on behalf of the International Agri-Food Network, alongside our panelists from PepsiCo, Yara, Tetra Pak, and we are all members of IAFN, which shows the private sector's commitment to climate action and taking serious steps. And that's why we're here at COP30. And we're equally fortunate to have Dulce with us. She's a farmer from Brazil, and she'll be representing the Global Farmers Network here. As you know, any serious discussion on agriculture must be centered around the needs of farmers and what really works for them. So I'm glad that Dulce is here to provide that perspective for us. And we're also really happy to partner with J-PAL, the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab. J-PAL is a global research center based at MIT and works to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. So J-PAL has analyzed many interventions by the private sector and other actors regarding farmers. So I'm pleased, without further ado, to introduce Leonie Riles from J-PAL to the stage to set the foundation for today's discussion. Leonie, to you.
Thank you. I'll stand over here to get started. We can, yeah. Great. Okay, well, hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Leonie Riles. I'm a senior policy associate at the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, which is short for J-PAL. I'm excited today to talk through some of the research that the J-PAL network has worked on over the last 15 years or so to analyze interventions that support small-scale farmers to both increase their access to markets and build their resilience to a changing climate. So I'll do a brief intro of how J-PAL operates and then dive right into the evidence. So J-PAL was founded in 2003 by Nobel laureates Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. We're now a network of over 1,000 researchers in over 100 universities across the globe. So you can see here some of the universities up on the slide. As Somang pointed out, the mission is really to help reduce global poverty by ensuring that the policies and programs that we're all implementing are backed by evidence. And we do three main things. The first is generate this evidence through randomized evaluations of social programs. The second is work with policymakers to ensure that evidence is being integrated into program design so that we're actually implementing what is working. And then the third is building capacity for impact evaluations. So to date, we have over 2,500 evaluations, and a lot of these are in the agriculture and climate space. So what I'm going to be sharing today comes in part from a research initiative called the Agriculture Technology Adoption Initiative. As the name states, the initiative is aiming to understand what the constraints are that small-scale farmers face to increasing their agricultural productivity and overall boosting their livelihoods. So this initiative is generously supported by the Gates Foundation and UK International Development. And we have 85 research projects. You can see on the slide where they are located geographically. The majority of the work is in sub-Saharan Africa and also in South Asia. So while the studies are, of course, context specific, what randomized evaluations allow us to do is really understand the why, right? The causal mechanism behind why an intervention is working. So we work very hard to then translate some of those learnings to adapt them to other contexts so that we can build evidence-backed programs throughout the globe. Okay, so that said, kind of the framing of how the evidence is generated, I'll now dive into some of the learnings on supporting small-scale farmers. So as we all know, small-scale farmers are on the front lines of climate change. They face many, many risks, from weather shocks to a limited access to financial tools, limited access to information about new technologies out there that could support them. So there's a lot of challenges here. Many of the programs are focused on improving productivity of farmers, and they may not be necessarily targeted at farmers' profitability, right? But in order for farmers to become well off, support their families, their communities, profitability is really what we want to care about here. And that leads me to the importance of market access. So it's not enough to stop at improvements in yields, but we really want to understand how to support farmers' profitability. So that's what I'll be focusing on today. As we all know, markets are really complicated. There's always two sides to the story. Farmers might be supported by one intervention while traders might be harmed. So we always want to think critically about the trade-offs here, of who's being supported, who's being harmed, and looking throughout the entire value chain and analyzing the whole ecosystem. And then the other point I want to mention is the challenge of scaling. So a lot of the interventions that are tested through J-PAL's research network are operating on a micro level. While to scale some of these programs like quality certification or trading platforms, we really need collaboration between governments, private sector to make this work on a large scale. So I'm very excited to hear from our panelists, their experiences with some of these types of interventions. Bit of a lag here. Okay, so today I'm going to dive into three kind of buckets of interventions. The first is on improving supplier information. The second is on contract farming, and the third is crop storage technologies. So all of these interventions have been tested in multiple locations through J-PAL's research network. And they're nicely synthesized in a policy brief that I'm excited to share with all of you after the session. The policy brief reviews 16 randomized evaluations and an additional 13 quasi-experimental studies. So by kind of that vast amount of research, we can start thinking and looking at themes across the studies to really understand what programs are working and why. So diving in now, the first is on improving supplier information. So traditionally, small-scale farmers receive information through extension services. They're often organized through ministries of agriculture. There might be a farmer field day for farmers to see a demonstration live of how, let's say, an improved seed works in the field. But what we're seeing is there's still quite a big gap in terms of adoption of new technologies. So there's a lot of reasons behind this. Some are a lack of trust, access to information. So what researchers in India, they partnered with the government of Odisha, and they tested a new type of information sharing. So rather than targeting the farmer themselves through kind of government-run extension, they partnered with input suppliers and informed the suppliers about the benefits of a flood-tolerant rice seed called Swarna Sub 1. So researchers then evaluated this program, and they had one group that was randomly assigned the traditional extension services, and the other that's testing this new mechanism of informing the input suppliers with information. Then when the impact on farmers in both of these administrative blocks were measured, the researchers found that the new flood-tolerant rice variety, adoption increased by over 50% in the group where the input suppliers were sharing the information and the benefits of the technology. So thinking broadly about why this might be the case, the researchers pointed to kind of aligned incentives, right? So the input suppliers are driven by improving their profits. So they can make convincing arguments to farmers in their communities where they have trusted relationships already, and encourage farmers to adopt that technology. So that's kind of one of the techniques I want to float to the crowd today, and hear also from the panelists later any reactions. One outstanding challenge, of course, is still lack of trust in these improved technologies. So in a lot of rural markets, being able to certify and really know the quality of a seed, for example, is challenging. So that's kind of a remaining challenge that I hope we can cover later today on the panel. So moving to the second bucket of interventions, I want to speak a little bit about contract farming. So contract farming, of course, involves a large-scale buyer sourcing from small-scale farmers, for example, and guaranteeing a price in some cases for farmers to offload their crops. What this does for especially small-scale farmers is create stability. And this stability is very, very critical for farmers to take risks, to try new technologies like improved seeds. And we're seeing this across studies that are testing different contracting models, that farmers are more likely to make investments in their farms that ultimately often pay off. So I want to share an example from Senegal that kind of combines both the contracting model and also touches a bit on quality. So in Senegal, researchers worked with local cooperatives, and they were targeting groundnut farmers. And a big issue that arises in groundnuts is aflatoxin. I'm sure some of you have heard of this kind of poisonous substance that grows on crops in humid climates if crops aren't properly stored. This is one harmful to human health, but it also really limits farmers' abilities to sell their crops, especially export, as there's strict export standards, of course, that if there's aflatoxins that's present in the crops, farmers aren't able to export. So what researchers here did was they developed a three-part contract. The first was providing credit for farmers to buy Aflasave, which is an input that can be used to support crops that reduces the risk of aflatoxins. So credit for Aflasave was the first component. The second component was information on how to actually use Aflasave. So often combining these interventions, these new technologies with information is critical for them to actually work in practice. And then the third was the price guarantee. So farmers, conditional on having high quality of their groundnuts, they were able to sell to the cooperatives at a price premium. So one group of farmers received this three-part contract. The other was not taking part in this type of contract. And when researchers then looked at the impacts of this contract over time, they found, one, that farmers were actually using Aflasave. So the increases were 80 percentage points. And also, really interestingly, sales increased as well to the cooperative of this high quality groundnut. So farmers were better off when engaging in this contract. And the lesson I kind of want to highlight here is that contracts can be quite specific to encourage the adoption of certain agricultural practices, techniques, technologies to ultimately help farmers produce higher quality. Okay, just one more, and then I'm excited to bring our panel up. So this is on storage technologies. So what I mean here can be as simple as a hermetically sealed bag or a grain warehouse, for example. And what storage allows farmers to do is, one, protect against pest and disease. That, of course, is a challenge that farmers are increasingly facing with a changing climate. And the second component is storing crops to sell later when markets are no longer flooded with everyone bringing their crops to the market. In these small rural markets, we see price fluctuations of over 100%, that farmers are really losing out on selling their product for a higher margin, because everyone is selling right at the harvest. And this comes from a need, right? So farmers at planting are making investments, and then they don't often make income throughout the whole agricultural season and are waiting to sell at harvest. So it makes sense that they would want to immediately sell their crops when they're losing out on a higher margin later on. So a study here in Kenya combined both a sealed bag for maize for farmers to store their crops, and then also provided a new type of loan rather than the typical loans that are produced at planting season for farmers to make investments in seeds and fertilizers and such. Gave the loan at post-harvest is the term for it, allowing them to kind of hold over and sell at a later time while still being able to feed their families, take care of basic needs. Farmers who were offered this combo of the storage technology and the loans saw their revenues increase by almost 30%. So kind of a lesson here I want to also highlight is kind of bundling different solutions together, of alleviating financial constraints here while also providing a technology. So those were the three kind of topics that I wanted to cover today. And I'm very excited to hear from our panelists react to some of these, and really kind of just one more time say kind of the importance of collaboration between governments, between private sector to develop more evidence-informed policies that are ultimately supporting small-scale farmers that really are at risk of a changing climate. So with that said, we can move on to our panel. Thanks all so much.
Thank you so much, Leonie. That was a really informative and insightful presentation, and had some surprising nuggets in there that I'm sure our panelists are eager to unpack. So without further ado, I'd love to invite our panelists back up. So Bernard Storm from Yara International, Dan Christensen from PepsiCo, Richard Ali from Tetra Pak, and Dulce Chioketa from the Global Farmers Network. So, yeah, I wanted to kind of start by asking some of our panelists about some of the work that they're doing with farmers on the ground. So Bernard, maybe I'll start with you. I know that Yara has worked with Brazilian coffee growers to reduce their carbon footprint, but also to price and position the coffee competitively in the market. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm happy to. Thanks for inviting Yara to come here and speak. So farmers are facing multiple types of climate risks, but what we all want to see is that farmers are motivated to reduce their crop carbon footprint, so optimizing how we produce the crops in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So we as Yara, we have established a collaboration with, and pardon my Brazilian Portuguese pronunciation, COGIP. So it's a large Brazilian coffee cooperative organizing large amounts of coffee growers in Brazil. And we are supplying these farmers with a close to zero emission fertilizer that helps them dramatically reduce the coffee crop carbon footprints. And by the way, if you drop by the Norwegian pavilion, you're able to taste the coffee there. It's being served for free. You're welcome if you want to. I also got quite inspired by the introduction here. So well, maybe also just to mention that we are doing quite a lot of work also in sub-Saharan Africa, in India, in other locations, both to look at how to improve productivity, but also to have resilience. And the research that was showed is spot on the same as our experience. Unless you have the whole value chain covered when you went to an intervention, it doesn't really work. But happy to get back to that a bit later.
Okay, just before we move on to Dan, I noticed that there's kind of competing events next door and it might be hard to hear. So I do invite you guys all to, there is free chairs here freed up by our panelists. So feel free to come up to the front if you're having trouble hearing. So Dan, we were talking earlier about PepsiCo's many, endeavors across the globe to work with farmers. And I noticed that PepsiCo is now trying to help them transition to regenerative practices. So could you tell us a little bit about that and maybe react a little to what Leonie has shared?
Yeah, you bet. And thank you again for the opportunity to be here. We're really excited to participate. Have such tremendous respect for CGIAR, FAO, the work that they do. I'll start by saying some of you may be wondering, why the heck is PepsiCo here? So you may know us, many know us as a beverage company, and we proudly are, but we're 60% food. And around the world, we have a network of 300,000 farmers that we work with either indirectly or directly to grow the crops that become Lay's, Cheetos, Doritos, Tostitos, Fritos, all the Eatos, guys. It starts with a farmer that grows a crop that ultimately, we buy and cook into a finished product. So when we think about scaling the work and making it come to life, I want to go back to something that you talked about that I think gets assumed, but oftentimes we get wrong. And that's the approach to working with farmers, because there is a trust gap for a lot of companies and other institutions to work with them. And that heavily informs the way that we look to bring anything that we do come to life, whether that's scaling regenerative practices or just working with them on a commercial basis. And it starts with listening and understanding, right? Meeting the farmer where they are at, trying to understand what their concerns are, what keeps them up at night. And, we work with farmers of all shapes and sizes. And as we think about the job to be done, the problem to solve there, at a high level, it really is trying to provide one of three forms of support. There's always a financial component, because what we're asking farmers to do costs money, whether that be, using a, lower carbon fertilizer that may have a little bit of a premium relative to anhydrous, or doing cover cropping or no-till. And so you have to provide the compensation to help reduce the risk. You also have to provide what we call, agronomic or technical assistance support, because every farmer wants to know, how does this practice affect my soil, my crop with my weather conditions? And the last piece is really the social support. So wherever we work with farmers around the globe, they really want to be able to learn from their neighbor, right? Like the guy in the next county over, the guy the next hectare over, who's been doing this for a while and has seeing results. So when you provide that type of wraparound support, I think we really see results. But it all starts with listening and understanding.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so Richard, I think a lot of people may not know that Tetra Pak works a lot in dairy supply chains. And so, yeah, I'm curious to hear from you about your experience with working with dairy farmers and training the trainer and trying to, resolve problems in that particular value chain.
Thank you very much. I guess most people here will think of Tetra Pak and think of packaging. We are far more than a packaging company. So we design factories. We make food processing equipment. We do all those type of things. But what we do directly with farmers is one of those things that very few people know us for. But we work with our dairy customers, so milk processing plants where the pasteurization takes place, where the cheese making takes place. In certain countries, Finland especially, where ice cream manufacture takes place. The Finns love ice cream. But we create something, we work with our customers and we create something called dairy hubs. Straightforwardly, these are extension systems where we work with smallholder farmers on helping them improve their yields, helping them optimize the inputs that they have. So that results in increased yields, increased profitability, so they can send their children to school. It results in a reduction in poverty, it results in improved animal welfare. All those real benefits that mean you have a far better supply chain. And for our customer, it means they are getting better quality milk, more milk that can be processed to provide to consumers. And I think one of the interesting bits in terms of a lot of research now is when you put investment into the processing and packaging, the manufacturing sector, and we call this the hidden middle, straightforwardly, because policymakers tend to look at farmers and they look at consumers, and they forget the 40% of added value that takes place in the middle of the supply chain, which builds markets, which is required. And the really important thing, I think, on all of this, on the latest research, shows that if you have an efficient and effective middle, that hidden middle in processing and manufacturing, it raises the price to farmers because they have less waste, they have a guaranteed market, if you like, but it also, especially in developing countries, lowers the price to consumers because there is less waste through the supply chain, there's greater, more efficient use of energy. So all those things together mean that, you know, I can say this, but I mean, we don't make cheese or milk or ice cream or anything. We work with our customers, but it's about working together. It's not about being aligned, because I always hear this word aligned in corporate ways. You can align two pieces of paper, but they're not joined. You've got to have a dovetailing system, a jigsaw, that people are actually interconnected. And it's that interconnection which helps you drive a reduction in waste, an improvement in people's incomes on the ground, and the economic development, which has to go hand in hand with decarbonization and environmental protection.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, a great reminder about, you know, how important it is. Like, I'm from the input sector and so is Bernhard, but, you know, there's a lot in the middle that goes to creating value and livelihoods. So Dulce, coming back to, I guess, from a producer perspective, you're a farmer, and yeah, I'd love to hear your reaction to, you know, what Leonie said, and also what the other panelists brought up here about how we as the private sector can help work, like, you know, farmers transition to more sustainable practices.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and proud sharing with you. Share my experience in relation to regenerative agriculture. In my opinion, what makes the farmers adopt the regenerative practices without losing competitiveness is confidence combined with results. In agriculture, we only make change when we see the practices works in the field and gain profitability, because sustainability needs to go hand in hand with the economy. It's not only talk or romanticisms. At Morena Agro, we notice no-till farming, crop rotation, integration of systems, traceability, inputs, biologicals, animal welfare. These practices bringing a lot of virtual cycle. And when we see this simple and clear evidence, productivity, cost, return, we adopt these methods. The numbers make sense when sustainability of a safe path. Agriculture Brazilian is already of sustainable practices, is already showcase a sustainable practices. Regarding partnership are fundamental. Embrapa Science, universities, companies, other farmers. It's incredible because we create a network. This network giving great opportunity to scale the regenerative practices. We bring together science, field, cooperation. The farmers feel part of something, and I has to courage to innovate. Finally, someone, I believe the companies can be good and do good at the same time. It's the end culture. I can produce food and preserve it. I can be profitable and care for people. I can help feed the world and mitigate climate change.
Okay, wow. Thanks, Jose.
Thank
It's
you.
really empowering to hear from that from a farmer, I think. Okay, well, actually, because our panelists here have been so great and so succinct in their responses, we actually are only at 11 a.m. So I'm gonna actually take the moderator's prerogative and sort of maybe throw a question, and you don't all have to answer. I think if you want to answer, you can, but I think there's still, agriculture is still, it's hard to decarbonize compared to energy. And you've seen in many climate COPs that all the focus is on energy and transport, the easier sectors to decarbonize. And, as a private sector, we just, there is a misconception out there that we are too hard to carbonize, and if you decarbonize, and if you try to make agriculture sustainable, you lose competitiveness. So, what do you have to say to that? What's your response, maybe?
I would just like to echo what was said. Unless the changes in farm management practices, unless that supports the farmer profitability, why would the farmers change? So we need to make sure that whatever technologies we are developing, whatever solutions, whatever research and development can bring to the farmers, it has to support the productivity and profitability of the farm. We are supporting farmers in many different ways to actually use less fertilizer. Super simple app to support rice growers in Asia. We do satellite image analysis of larger farms to provide variable rate fertilizer application maps for the fertilizer spreaders. We work with the Californian almond growers who are changing into regen ag practices, so helping them change to drip irrigation using smarter crop nutrition programs, so that reduces fertilizer consumption, it reduces water consumption, but it increases yields. So that gives the farmers a higher return on investment by working with us. And that is how we work. But I really wanted to loop back on this whole value chain perspective. And I will not say which year and which country, but one of our sub-Saharan Africa country managers shared a story with me that he was in the Ministry of Agriculture discussing their fertilizer subsidy program. And he told the ministry that you're putting in way too much money. This is not going to work. But this was an election year and there was competition for votes. And there you have it. It was a very generous subsidy scheme. At first, farmers very happy, buying a lot of fertilizers. They had bumper crops. But what happened? Local markets were flooded by maize and you didn't have an offtake. Prices collapsed. The maize was rotting in the fields and the farmers were no better off. And examples such as these is why we always want to have an off-taker before we do an intervention in a specific crop or a specific region. So we've worked together with the World Food Program, Bayer and Rabobank to establish the Farmer-to-Market Alliance. And in this alliance, we can do interventions with farmers to increase their productivity. And then the World Food Program is the ultimate off-taker to buy the product unless there is a local market for it. So this has worked pretty well. There's some 600,000+ farmers on this program now, and they have sold crops for more than $45 million. So it's just an example to the introduction here that unless you have the full value chain involved, it's not really going to work.
Yeah, I would just build on that and say, decarbonization is hard, period, right? I mean, so I don't know that agriculture is that much different from other sectors, but I think, we've had the good fortune to participate in the SB process here in Brazil. We've co-chaired the Food Systems Working Group. And one of the examples that we have of pilots that can scale and bring regenerative agriculture practice to more acres, we've highlighted in the US, and it's a group called the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. And it all comes back to having the right approach, right? Listening, understanding, working with the farmers, meeting them where we're at. And we have so many examples of those around the world, right? We have great partnership internationally with Yara here in Brazil too, where we're doing great work to bring lower carbon fertilizers to farmers in our supply chain. But I think our perspective is that we've reached the problem of scale, the scale cap. And so, I lead our global public policy team, spend a lot of time thinking about policy as an enabler, and that's really where we need policy. Like, private sector is leading the way on innovation. We are showing what can work in different geographies around the world, different crops. So we have plenty of examples of what works. What we need is two things. One, we need more companies in the boat with us doing this work. As we look across the world, it's the usual suspects, us, a handful of other big CPG companies, great partners like Yara and others in the value chain. We need more of the value chain represented. We need retailers in the boat with us too. We need others. And then we really need governments to step up and send better demand signals, right? And what the demand signal is just a fancy word for saying we're willing to pay for that, right? Their farmers are producing something of value when they transition to these practices, better soil health, better water quality, lowering carbon emissions. That has value. As a society, we should be willing to pay for that. And when the government sends the demand signal that they're willing to pay for it, like, that's a classic case of crowding in private investment. And there should be no doubt that the private sector is willing to do that. We've got so many examples across the world where when the government sends the demand signal, when they go first, private sector comes in. I mean, in the US, we had great success with programs. We've had success with other programs around the world. But, as you look across the globe at how governments are spending money on sustainable agriculture at a farm level, when it looks close to what we're doing, what we find more often than not is there's no opportunity for co-investment, right? So asking for new money is much harder to do. I think as a community, what we're leaning into is going to governments and saying, can we help you spend the money you're already spending better, right? If you could just create more of an opportunity for private sector match, for example, whatever it is, private sector will show up. I mean, I'll just double down on the example from the US, with the program I was referring to, which, really enabled us to scale the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund program partnership. That was a $3 billion program that USDA attracted almost $18 billion in private sector proposals for, right? So clear data point, private sector is willing to step up, need more companies in the boat with us, and need more government sending clear demand signals.
Yes, sure.
I want to follow up on something you mentioned of a lot of the technology and the science is there. It's right. It's a matter of how do we get it into the hands of small scale farmers who might not know about how the technologies work or have access to them. So closing that gap, I think, is still a large challenge that remains. And something you mentioned early on in I think your introduction, the importance of trust, right? Building that trust with the communities that you're working with, so that they have confidence, as you were saying, in trusting the information you're sharing and wanting to use kind of the low carbon fertilizer, for example. So one of the kind of bigger buckets of interventions that J-PAL has looked at is how to improve kind of extension services and access to information. What are the qualities that make for a good information sharing? And that trust factor is always at the root or at the heart of what makes interventions work. So what's interesting now is, of course, with explosion of digital tools and the opportunity to kind of harness AI as well in information systems. The question there is, how do we continue to have that trust factor resonate with the communities who are maybe accessing information more quickly through digital platforms? So that's one issue or one topic I wanted to raise also to the group. If kind of you have experienced kind of that information sharing through digital tools, how that works for you, and how the trust factor also plays in.
I just quickly want to come back on this, what I think is a really important point. So when we think of agri-food systems, not just farming, it accounts for about a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. But perhaps the low-hanging fruit, maybe it's a difficult low-hanging fruit to reach because it's still a very high tree, is actually food loss and waste. 40% of every piece of food that is grown is either lost or wasted. 40%. So all the efforts, all the inputs that go into it, gone. Leonie made the really important point about crop storage. Crop storage for those non-perishable crops are really important, but also having the capacity in place to give some degree of immortality to milk or tomatoes or whatever it might be is also really, really critical. So you can take a developing country example, which is exactly the same as a developed country example of tomatoes. You have a huge glut of tomatoes. You have no processing or packaging capacity to deal with those and turn them into tomato paste. It's a waste. So this is where actually, I'm going to do the Tetra Pak bit here. This is actually where good packaging is really, really important because you don't lose it. That functionality that is provided is also critical. So making sure we're able to have on-farm storage or possibly off-farm storage of crops, but also that we are harnessing our technology to process, to package, then to make sure we can distribute. If we could deal with that 40% food loss and waste, the impact is absolutely huge. It's 12% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And unfortunately, oftentimes people forget it's the waste that we have to deal with, not just going back and saying, oh, isn't it farmers' fault? Let's work together here and make sure we can come out with the right solutions.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not possible, this transition alone. I think it's necessary to bring together companies, society, universities, farmers, every. Because this, I would like to visit my farm. I can show the successful agriculture in the state of Mato Grosso. In my farm, I have many process, many practices, regeneratives, not only the crops, the people, the society. It's wonderful. I love my activity because it is. I show if you visit Morena Agro in the middle Brazil, Mato Grosso state. Mato Grosso, it's the big state. It's very far Belém, but I love.
Okay, well, so I'm sure that some of you may have questions for our panelists. Please raise your hand, and yes, we'll pass the microphone around, I think. If you could state your name and where you're from, and then point to which panelist you'd like to answer, or maybe it's self-evident.
Hi, I'm Donald Moore. I'm with the Global Dairy Platform, and I wanted to pick up on something that I think Bernard touched on, and also Richard, and that is the way we connect farmers to markets is through processing often. And you called it the hidden middle, Richard. I actually like to think of it as critical infrastructure in the value chain, because without that critical infrastructure, often the products get spoiled before they reach the market. I think one of the challenges that we've seen, we're doing projects in East Africa with the Green Climate Fund and so on, is a reluctance for investment in the value chain, in that infrastructure. And I'd be just curious on any comments from the panel as to how we can make sure that when we're thinking about investments in the food and ag system, we're not investing at one end of the value chain or the other. So typically we see people willing to invest in farmers, or they're willing to invest in some offtake program, and they're ignoring the hidden middle, Richard's term, critical infrastructure that is needed to connect the two. So a question for me, and I think it fits into the how do we make the private sector and markets work for farmers? Thank you.
Hey.
I think that's an extremely important question, and we have made some efforts. We have worked to set up farmer cooperatives in Ghana, where storage at the village level was an important part of this, exactly to enable them to not sell everything exactly at core of logistics in Tanzania. I guess I can say so much that the grand schemes where you depend upon maybe 20, 40 different stakeholders to making their investments in a well-coordinated manner is incredibly hard to make happen. So I think I'll just resort to a great phrase that I got from Theo de Jager, the previous president of the World Farmers Organization. We were in a panel together, and he said, it's called a value chain for a good reason. You can only pull a chain. You can't push it. So I think we need to start, and you're touching upon it, I think we need to start with where do we have demand? And starting from that demand, where can we connect those farmers who may have an opportunity to transfer from growing maize to growing fruits and vegetables? But I think we need to build that bottom up, which is tricky.
Donald, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, that middle of the chain is an essential infrastructure. Just like airports, just like ports, just like railways, just like roads. And if you put it in place, you are then able to do more connection, and people use the infrastructure to develop. The other thing the middle does, of course, it transfers information from consumer wants back down the chain. I think one of the important things is to make sure we have that simplification and standardization around specifications, because that means you produce the right thing on farm, you use the right livestock breeds. We were talking about that earlier. You use the right livestock breeds. In dairy, you get the right milk fat content, etc., etc. All those things actually help. And extension services, whether they are provided by the private sector or whether they are provided by government, as long as those are linked to the market, then you can generate real benefits. So absolutely agree with you, Donald. I mean, this is fundamental to how we move the entire agri-food system forward in terms of decarbonization, economic growth, and food safety.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Donald. And I would like to also add that I think that how to address this hidden middle and how to bring up the value across the food chain and, and also not just, I guess, focus on the very, sort of growing part. I think, even as an input sector, crop life, we always think of it as agri-entrepreneurship, right? And I think it would be better for governments and incentives to align more around that. Farmers are aging all over the world, right? You can't just only look to farmers. Of course, it would be ideal, like in Dulce's case, if a farmer sort of grows in scale and like is able to, scale up. But of course, bringing talent from outside of agriculture, people who work in tech, and in sub-Saharan Africa, there is like a lack of jobs problem as well. So CropLife has been working in Africa to try and like help young people who are entrepreneurial, help them with jobs training so that they can become agronomists or like crop services providers, like spray service providers. And there are a lot of great programs. So I think it's like time to think outside the box and try to get like more entrepreneurship up and down the system, a food processor who wants to, or a processor who works in a different sector who maybe sees an opportunity in like food processing or storage. As long as they have some access to credit, they should be able to and fully empowered to. And I think that's how you sort of create large systems of change. Are there any other questions from or Dulce? Yeah.
Sorry. Morena Agro stay in Cerrado bioma. I don't know, but Cerrado, the soil is very poor, a few organic matter. But in compensation, we have a well-distributed rainfall and there are a few climatic events. In almost 4 years, we transformed this soil in a lot of productivity. Now, Mato Grosso is the most bioma that produce corn, soybean, cotton, beef, and corn ethanol, because we use conservationist practices, technologies, science, innovation is wonderful. I can be part of solution this problem climate change. The farmers can be a solution, can part of solution this problem.
Yeah, agreed. I think on-farm innovation is really important as well. And farms also create a lot of jobs as well, right? As they scale up and a lot of people within that farm get trained and they strike out on their own or they specialize in different activities on the farm. Are there any other questions from the floor for our panelists? Okay. Well, what are there any? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Hi, Petra.
Good morning. I have one to Yara. Given fertilizer is so relevant in the climate mitigation, right? And at many events, we get this critique for subsidizing chemical inputs. What they mean is fertilizer and the use of biological fertilization instead. I'm sure Yara has thoughts about this and you probably have some programs. Could you maybe give an example in this context, how this issue can be addressed and to which extent biological fertilizer is really different or better, and what is the science behind? Thank you.
This is certainly a topic we are looking into quite a lot. Maybe starting on the mineral fertilizer production side, we are looking at how to decarbonize. So we can do very efficient carbon capture and storage. We can produce on basis of renewable natural gas, that is gas coming from biological waste sources, which is something that is a great potential here in Brazil. It also exists a certificate system for that in Europe. Or we can produce on basis of renewable energy and electrolysis of water, thereby avoiding using fossil inputs altogether. When it comes to the use phase, we are exploring circular economy solutions. I think to summarize a bit, it is always opportunistic and based on local conditions. If you have a good nutrient source available in your local region, you can do that. The biological ones have very low nutrient content, so it's not profitable to transport those over long distances. But we have a few ongoing business opportunities in that space, such as in Italy, France, parts of Spain, where we have a small business recycling predominantly chicken litter, and then also in Finland, where there's a lot of forest residue that we process the forest residues into what can be used as a soil enhancement substance, also containing some nutrients. So we are exploring that space, but there are no quick fixes. And then you also have, of course, the emerging area of research and development, looking at how to do adding nitrogen fixing nodules in crops. That can be promising to reduce an increased demand for fertilizers, but not to forget the precision farming technologies should also be utilized, so that we don't continue wasting a lot of what is a very energy and emission intensive product. So we are looking into all of these areas, and I would say we need to leverage all of them. There's not one silver bullet.
Hey, thank you, guys. I'm really happy that we had this panel today. We had everybody from inputs providers and a producer to, off-takers and processors, and also, J-PAL, who was able to share some evidence-based, techniques, I would say, and solutions for us in the agricultural sector. And I hope that everyone has had some food for thought, and who our panelists are. So if you want to reach out to them for collaboration, because I think collaboration is key here. You know who we are and you know where to find us. I would say, Leonie, you mentioned that you have some policy briefs, so you can approach her for that. We at CropLife have tried to compile some success stories from across the private sector on how to work with in different contexts for sustainable agricultural growth. So please approach us for that as well. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on this panel. And we hope that we've left you with some food for thought and some inspiration. Thank you. Oh, and I would like to thank the CGIAR for giving us a great venue for convening this.